After months of campaign and criticism, Mayor de Blasio won a major victory in the City Council yesterday when his two sweeping citywide zoning changes, affectionately known as MIH and ZQA, won overwhelming support from city legislators. But as the mayor and his staff often told us through this process, those two measures are not the mayor's housing plan, but merely the framework within which that plan will take shape. Now the focus moves to the 15 or so neighborhoods that the administration plans to rezone to hold more people and it promises more affordable housing. We want to get a better idea of what to watch for and watch out for in that process. So we've invited 4 people who have been keeping as close an eye on these developments as anyone in the city. They are Paula Crespo, Senior Planner at the Pratt Center for Community Development. Welcome, Paula. Renata Pumaral, the Communications and Social Media Coordinator at New York Communities for Change. Hi, Renata. Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development Deputy Director Barika Williams. Thanks for coming on, Barika. And Brother Paul Muhammad, a member of the Coalition for Community Advancement in East New York. Good afternoon, and thanks for coming. So yesterday, the City Council, 2 big votes. I think we'll focus mainly on mandatory inclusionary housing. And let's pretend we're City Council members. We're pulling down $148K, which is not bad now. And we have to vote on MIH. How would we all have voted?
I mean, I think the council did the most to get the deepest affordability, and they accomplished that. Now we're targeting folks making $31,000, so that's a major step forward. And now we need to work harder to get to even deeper affordability in the neighborhoods that are set to be rezoned.
That sounds like a yes, Brother Paul?
I think they didn't work hard enough to represent the community that's definitely need representation, those under the $31,000 mark and those that are on the borderline, because remember there's so many things that are mitigating circumstances to getting into the homes they're planning on building.
Maybe a no from you, or a skeptical yes.
I think it would be pushing further to require deeper affordability in every scenario within MIH and a standalone option that guarantees deep affordability. So pushing further to make sure deep affordability was a part of MIH. So maybe.
I don't know if that vote would have been recorded, but, and how about you?
I echo Barika's comments. I don't think enough was done to push for deep affordability. So, and leaving too much uncertainty about whether that can be met in different ways.
The argument that the administration made, and you all heard it, was that this is zoning. We can't layer too much on it. We could get a legal challenge. We could run into market non-feasibility, that this was as far as we could push. Is that a valid argument?
So I think ANHD has been working on MIH for over a decade now, and we were very conscious of and very cognizant of thinking about making sure that we as a housing community, as housing advocates, as representatives of community groups didn't push so far that we actually broke the tool. We understand that that's a reality, but at the same time, it's also thinking about what's the priority and who's being left out, and whether or not a tool that leaves out big chunks of our neighborhoods and our city population, what that then is paired with. And if it's not an MIH, where are we finding housing and opportunities for those residents?
An interesting argument that came up during the debate was from Brooklyn's own Jumani Williams, who mentioned that the way that this is structured, it's all about options. Neighborhoods, city council members, and community boards will have the option of selecting from different kind of affordability templates. And then developers will get to pick from those in terms of the actual building. And his concern was that you could have neighborhoods that maybe don't want to have people of relatively low or very low incomes there, and can basically select an option that would keep them out, at least out of the affordable housing. Is that a concern? He was the first person I heard articulate that, but is that a concern any of you share?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why we agree that, like, this is where the real fight begins, right? Especially in neighborhoods like East New York, which is one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city, right? And we need to fight harder to get to deeper affordability. That includes residents making below $31,000, which is a huge portion of the population in East New York and in the Bronx.
Brother Paul, East New York is where you're from. We've heard a lot about that neighborhood. It's the first one we knew about. It's the one that has gone the furthest through the ULURP process. I know there's been a community plan, there's been a city plan. Has there been any movement by the administration to meet the community halfway in terms of the things you've asked for?
Well, to be gracious to say halfway. I think they've heard us, and I think we've been loud and clear to the fact that they need to do more to address what's going on in East New York. But again, I think one of the things that got out of this is that when you give way to the 20% that they actually agreed to do, that's like signing the deed of a house and giving the keys and then ask them, let's negotiate the price. There's things in East New York they could have done to help sustain the present housing that we do have to shore that up, because people are living there and living there under the present rent guidelines. But I think right now when you're making way for these builders, you're giving too much of a license to do things like those options are in place, and we already suffer with 23 shelters in East New York now. So we have a lot of things in place in East New York which has its own fingerprint I think they need to address.
And Paula, what happens, we've heard about East New York, what happens next? The mayor has said the zoning things, that's not the plan. MIH isn't the plan. So when will we get to see the plan?
That's a very good question. I think these next, 25 odd days will hopefully reveal some more of the things that the East New York community is fighting for. And just to add a little bit to what Brother Paul said, we have to remember this isn't just about the creation of new affordable housing units, but about the notion that these rezoning plans could introduce, tens of thousands of new people and households into the neighborhood. So we need to pay attention to a lot of other things, right? Things like community facilities, making sure there'll be enough schools and daycare centers and libraries to meet the needs of a growing population. This is particularly important in East New York because it's been a neglected community for so long, and the existing community, today needs these things. So how will this rezoning plan ensure that these types of community needs are, met as the community grows?
That's a great point, because from the outset, the de Blasio team said that what was going to be different about their approach was going to be an engaged process. Communities are going to have a voice in shaping these plans, and it was not just going to be about housing. Have either of those, Barika, have either of those come to fruition so far?
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that housing is the #1 priority within these rezoning plans. That's front and center, and I think what you've heard from communities in East New York, from the coalition, but also across the city, across the borough, is it's not just a matter of housing, right? People want to know what happens to their transportation, what happens to their school seats, what happens to their infrastructure. All of these conversations and questions are happening, and it's really been a big challenge and a big pushback on the community, by the community, to say to the city, we need to understand and we want to see commitments on all of these different things so that we end up with the neighborhood sort of full infrastructure that we need, not just a piece, right?
How about the engagement piece? I think the episode we saw on the council this week is an example. I mean, the Real Affordability for All coalition ended up supporting the plan. Elements of that coalition said that they disagreed with that decision. So whenever you have discussion in a big, vibrant democracy like New York, people are going to disagree. What's the appropriate role of community engagement in this? When can communities say no? When do they have to learn how to say yes? And how should the mayor handle that as we move from East New York to other neighborhoods?
Well, I find that in East New York, what we found that when they engaged us, when they did, it was more speaking to us than speaking with us. We found on the Coalition of Community Advancement, we had our platform, we did our own rezoning plan with the AMI we had in East New York. I mean, when the mayor came out, they were telling us things like home attendants make $40,000 a year in East New York, which is outrageous, but I would have got a job like that a long time ago, and I worked in Wall Street. Well, we found out they didn't come in and examine our obstacles we have now, as far as the unemployment issue we have there. The plan there, nothing's affordable without a job. So you're coming to a community that's been disenfranchised for 40 years, been victimized by crack, heroin, and other epidemics. In their plan, they never had in for a school or a medical facility. The school they're talking about building is 10 years overdue. I have a daughter that's a guidance counselor in Thomas Jefferson School I graduated from. So this plan that the mayor put upon East New York, or proposed for East New York, had no consideration, deep consideration, what actually are the factors that are affecting the people there now. So we found that when they came out to engage us, it was more talking about the plan they wanted to put forth than planning with the people.
Do you feel like most people, most residents of East New York are aware of this process now? Are they engaged in it, or is the awareness, has it still not penetrated through the neighborhood? Well,
through the work of the coalition I'm on and others, Rafa, and we've been moving about engaging folks in the street, on the street level with this. And they're quite appalled, because when you actually, and when you say the word affordable doesn't mean cheap, it's a relative word. I always say Jay-Z and I go into a dealership, He sees a Bentley for $700,000. I see it. He says that's affordable. I says not to me. So affordability has nowhere. One of the things I think that have escaped us, and I don't want to go too long, is affordable has been substituted for the word affirmative actions that should have been done in East New York well over the last 40 years. You know, we're finding out the Fair Housing Act of 1968 it was not. It's being retrenched on. We're finding folks now try to just find places to live. Again, I say that the mayor, they did come out in the community, but it was more speaking to, not speaking with.
And I think on that, I think actually one of the things, especially in Brooklyn, is that people are much more cognizant of what rezoning means, right? When we think about what happened in 2004 in Park Slope and the difference in the neighborhood before and the difference afterwards, when we as residents of Brooklyn hear rezoning, we know now that this means big changes for neighborhoods, right? And I think that means that folks pay a lot more attention. They're much more interested in getting involved because it is the difference between whether or not you can stay in your neighborhood, whether or not you can afford a neighborhood, whether or not your kid's going to have a place to go to school in the neighborhood, and whether or not you're going to be able to get a job. And those are critical about living in this borough.
Speaking of other neighborhoods, where does this process go after East New York? Any sense of what's sort of next on the docket?
Well, some of the other neighborhoods that have been announced are the Jerome Avenue corridor in the Bronx, the North Shore of Staten Island, the Bay Street corridor, East Harlem. Right. So those are some of the next ones.
Have you seen, what would you say ties the different neighborhoods that have been named so far together? Is there a common thread? I mean, they're across all 5 boroughs. What makes them similar that they're all getting attention?
Some of them, I think, are similar because they depend a lot on rezoning industrially zoned land. So that is definitely the case in East New York. All of the M zones, as we call them, manufacturing zones, are going to be rezoned to either residential or this mixed use designation. The same is the case in Bay Street and Staten Island. So while, you know, it's understandable that in order to promote housing development, you need to change the rules of the game, and because right now you can't build housing as of right in a manufacturing zone, it's a big concern to a lot of stakeholders because you're going to permanently get rid of land that, you know, used to house industrial jobs. So that's one commonality.
What will you be looking for now that we move to this neighborhood by neighborhood focus? I mean, the zoning, MIH is in place. Is it about subsidies? Is it about industrial retention? What do you think you're most concerned about?
As far as Rafa, what I do agree with Barika is that we need more tools in the toolkit, right? And that's why we're working closely with the administration in developing a study that will move forward with a 50% affordability in future rezonings, most of them for people making below $31,000 and also having job standards for the community. So that's what we look forward to implementing in the future rezoning. So that
and I think also some concern about who will be doing this work, right? About labor practices, just building housing.
Of course, we want to make sure that that the jobs that come into this community are good jobs that the people can benefit from and that have good safety standards, et cetera.
So let's pull back a little bit and talk big picture. The rezonings will come up. They will happen probably in some form. How will we know if this has worked? The mayor has his goal of a number of units to be built or preserved, but there's been some debate about whether that's really an indication of the city becoming more or less affordable. When will we know that this has or hasn't worked, and what will we all be looking for to test that? Well, don't all go at once.
I'm not sure what the exact metric or indicator will be, but I think one way to see if this rezoning overall plan has worked is to look at displacement and see how much secondary displacement has happened, right? When people are pressured to leave because rents rise. And if I feel like if we see massive tides of displacement, even if we see a portion of newly created affordable housing, I think that will be a sign that it has not worked well.
What are you looking for?
I think one of the concerns we have and one of the things we'll be looking for is how much what we're considering a success or a failure is actually tied to residents that are currently in the community as opposed to a new wave of people. It's entirely feasible that East New York could become completely affordable but have nothing to do with the current resident population that's there now, right? And so it's not just about affordability units, it's also about the neighborhood and its residents.
Exactly, because East New York right now has a fingerprint on. My family bought property over 47 years ago there. There are 2- and 3-family homes that are there now. that need to be preserved because that's the basis of the wealth. We understand the difference between black and brown wealth and white wealth is 10 to 1 in this country. So we have a problem here we have to address. How do you maintain the wealth that's there? How do you maintain the people who are there to be there? See, our future is not just tied to the fact of providing housing for somebody else to come in. How about housing for my future and my children to live there that can't afford to go someplace else? And helping people there who want jobs, who need jobs, get trained properly. We don't need a plan, we need action. You came up with a plan to get 20% MIH. Well, are you training the people? We have to build people as well as buildings.
Renata, how about you? What are you looking for, and when do you think you'll be able to say it's there or it's not?
Yeah, I think I agree with all my peers, but I would add to that, housing people that are most in need. I mean, we have members that are living in an entire family in a one-bedroom apartment. We need to house the people that are most vulnerable, seniors on mixed income, low-income families. So for us, it's really providing housing for those, for the most vulnerable.
Well, it's a 10-year plan that Blasio's in the middle of, so you will all be on my speed dial for 10 years. I expect my calls return, and we'll definitely have you back here, but thanks very much for being on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.